continue to invite you to conclude when you are done, and as a community, we'll move forward and I'll give some teaching. My husband and I recently celebrated our 4-year wedding anniversary. Toda. For those of you who have not yet experienced this milestone, I wish you blessings of love and togetherness and companionship. And for those of you who have experienced this milestone personally, thank you for sharing your good wishes and your life insights with me and with us. You've said that there's a lot for us to look forward to, and that the path ahead will continue to get much more interesting. I thought about this idea that the path ahead will continue to get more and more interesting as my husband made a surprising assertion in a moment of discussion. He said pointedly, you are actually the pessimist in this relationship. He said, I'm the one who thinks that things will work out, and you are the one who's expecting things to go wrong. Naturally, I was taken aback. Me? A pessimist? Of course I disagreed. While our conversation that day continued, our difference of opinion stood unresolved. A few weeks after this conversation, my husband and I went to see the film Barbie. We saw it quite a while after it first came out, so we entered the theater with a great deal of anticipation. We watched the film, and as we were leaving the theater, we were sharing some of our first reactions. My husband said, wow, it's been a long time since I walked out of a movie theater with a changed view of the world. This movie is really going to make a change, he said. It's really going to make an impact. So what was my response? I'll be honest, my first reaction to his statement was disbelief. What are you talking about? I said. Look around our world. How much change could this possibly make? But then I stopped myself. I thought back to my husband's previous assertion about who was really the optimist and who was really the pessimist in our relationship. And then I had a great moment of insight. My husband was right, and I was wrong. I hadn't realized it at first, but our conversation that day hinted at the most important questions that we as the Jewish people must grapple with during this time of year, during our days of awe, our season of Teshuvah. Is change really possible? Can our world become a better place? And can we as individuals become better people? After my initial, and I will admit, pessimistic reaction, I immediately realized that my doubt about the world's ability to change was not as well-founded as I initially thought. I thought about my childhood and upbringing, appreciating that I was raised to believe I could achieve my dreams, that my gender was not a limitation. And I thought about my path as a rabbi, appreciating that among my teachers and role models were a whole generation of female rabbis that preceded me, not just in the conservative movement, but also in the Reform and Reconstructionist movements. It's not just the world can change, it's that the world has changed. But lest I swing too quickly towards optimism, I'll remind us of Judaism's best-known pessimist, Kohelet, also known as Ecclesiastes. Utter futility, says Kohelet, utter futility, all is futile. One generation goes, another comes, and nothing changes. There is nothing new beneath the sun. He continues, sometimes a hero is repaid as if he were a scoundrel, and sometimes a scoundrel is repaid if he were a hero. All of that, utter futility. These words of Kohelet are also words of Torah. They exist within our tradition because at times they ring true. We have all felt the disappointment, the futility of seeing ourselves or another person do the right thing and receive a punishment and not a reward. What then is the point of doing the right thing at all? Even though Kohelet's words are words of Torah, they can be dangerous for us. When we fall into a pattern of believing that change isn't possible, we might sit back, we might step away. We might even pretend to ourselves that we don't really care after all. Even Kohelet can see this another way. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time for killing and a time for healing. A time for tearing down and a time for building up. A time for tears and a time for laughter. A time for crying and a time for dancing. A time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones. A time for embracing and a time for distancing. A time for seeking and a time for losing. A time for keeping and a time for discarding. A time for ripping and a time for sewing. A time for silence and a time for speaking. A time for love and a time for hate. A time for war and a time for peace. In these most resonant words, Kohelet affirms that it's not actually true that everything is bad. It's just that some things are bad and some things are good. It's just that some times are bad and sometimes are good. Life is not one or the other. It's a balance of both. Perhaps my husband and I both had reactions to the film that missed this insight from Kohelet. Perhaps it's a bit aspirational to say that one film will change society, yet it takes a closed mind and a closed heart indeed to ignore that the world has changed, and in some ways it has changed for the better. The rabbis of the Talmud teach us that positive change, which we call teshuvah, was created by God before God even created the world. Their proof is a passage from Psalms which reads, "Before the mountains were brought forth, before you had formed the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity you are God. You return humankind to their conscience, to their best self, and you say, return to your best selves, children of humankind." My teacher, Rabbi Mark Borovitz, explains this concept in his own words. God knew, even before God created humankind, that we were going to mess up. And God created teshuvah because God wanted to give us a way back. In the film Barbie, there is a moment of spiritual heroism that should not go unappreciated. At this point, near the end of the film, Barbie has experienced a world in which the tables have been turned. She's had experiences that enable her to understand others, experiences that have given her a new perspective. From this insight, Barbie is able to understand for the first time that her behavior has been hurtful to Ken. "I'm sorry for taking you for granted," Barbie says, admitting that she could have and should have given Ken more time, attention, and respect. Like Barbie, when we have life experiences that show us a new perspective, we gain insight into the ways our actions have impacted others. More often than any of us would want to admit, we can make choices and choose words that are hurtful to others, and we don't even mean it. When we apologize for those wrongs, we are spiritual heroes, and we are accepting God's gift of teshuvah. We are choosing to take the path of return to our best selves, return to our conscience. All the more so, we are spiritual heroes when we are willing to recognize that we have taken actions, that we have made choices that we know are harmful to others. Perhaps we intended to hurt out of anger, revenge, or spite. Perhaps we simply put our own interests first, even when we knew or suspected that to do so would cause harm. We are spiritual heroes when we make the choice to stop these behaviors and take the path of teshuvah, of recognizing our wrongs, articulating sincere apology, and working to repair the damage we've caused. On this Kol Nidre, I invite all of us to embrace the path of optimism. Positive change is possible. Our world can become a better place. and we can become better people. Consider that even before God created the world, God gave us the ability to make the choice to change. That God gave us this option knowing we will never be perfect, yet still wanting us to choose to be good. Of course, sometimes we'll look at the world and feel like Kohelet feels, that all is futile, that nothing will ever change. In those moments when we cannot help but turn towards pessimism, I invite us to consider a different perspective from Kohelet, the perspective of a realist. For everything there is a season, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time of war and a time of peace. This time, tonight, right now, this is our time for peace. Right now, tonight, this is our time for building up, for embrace, and for love. This is our season to choose to take the path of teshuvah, to find our way back to our best selves. Tonight, without any delay, let's start on this path. Let's make positive change, not just possible, but real. Starting right here and now, with your intention and your mindset, change something in yourself so that you will make our world a better place, so that you can become a better person. As you make this change, you might make the choice to share it with your loved ones, or you might make the choice as we spend tonight and tomorrow together in community and prayer to share this change in your words of prayer and reflection. But either way, let's not delay. Our time for teshuvah is now. May we have a special day of reflection and togetherness ahead. May we have an easy and a meaningful fast. May we all be written and sealed for a year of goodness and sweetness, a year of positive change, a year perhaps even of optimism, and a year of return to our best selves. Gemar Chatima Tova.